Hey everyone, welcome to MomSimply. So try to. I'm at my parents' house, so we're just gonna front with that right now. And internet may be different. So if we just disappear and go away, know that we're still here waiting for you, and we may or may not come back. So this might be series, like episode 1, episode 2, episode 3. Hey Lisa, how are you, friend? I want to give a shout out to our girls. So just a little backstory from this morning. I came into Buffalo from Rochester. My girl Laura, who is my guest today, is a longtime friend from 9th grade. We met in 9th grade math class. And Mrs. Domino. And I've always been very bad at math. I feel like you helped me a lot in class.
No, I was awful. We both were really bad.
We actually sat in the back left, and I think we just talked a lot during that class. And she was one of those friends that your yearbook, they were very meaningful and overly dramatic for 9th, 10th, 11th, 12th grade. And there's a video of us that my parents had take from Varsity Chorale Chorus, throwback, and we're singing some, I don't know, intense, I think it was Time. And there's a picture of us feeling this moment because we're so we're so deep at 15 years old of us slowly grabbing each other's hands as the chorus went into unison. Do you know what part I'm talking about? So really dramatic all of the time. This is my sister wife when it comes to that. And I'm so excited about this, and I just want to love on you so much because PPD, postpartum depression, I think is getting better, but there's still a huge stigma about it. And we're here to talk about that. It's not a one size fits all. It's not one colored. There's many shades, there's many depths, there's many layers. So not only are you going to hear a story today, but also next week you're going to hear a different story. And what I really want to share with all of you is if you could share these with anyone you know who might be suffering from this, the more people feel normalized about PPD, the more they can feel empowered to reach out and get help and not isolate themselves. Because as Laura's going to kind of paint the picture for you, that's a very common thing with PPD. So we're going to first give a background story. Who is this lovely lady? And a lot of you are friends with us, so you already know. But for those of you that may be friends with me and not my bestie, she's going to kind of talk about her tribe, where she lives, who her little love bugs are, and maybe a funny story about us too.
Okay. Hi everyone, I'm Laura Smith. You probably, if you've been on these videos, you've probably seen me comment and and
yeah, you've been a big supporter.
Yeah.
Can I talk real quick that she sent me a care package, and this is such a God moment, but the card was not in this care package. So I'm calling her saying I got these wonderful gifts. I got this mom fuel wine glass, these queen bee little gold mom earrings, beautiful. So she has to read aloud the card to me on the phone. Both of us are sobbing on the phone, and that's just a sliver of this mama's heart. So she's a good one. You're a good one.
Thanks. No, I'm just supporting my girl. But my name's Laura, and we and Amanda, like she said, have known each other since high school. Actually, since middle school, but we just weren't friends until...
Because we're in different teams, middle school teams.
Alden, shout out. But my current situation, so my husband Donnie and I live in New York City with our 2 little babes. Vivian, she is 2.5, and Theodore he just turned 1 in January. So our hands are...
And yes, you're hearing that correctly. They are that close in age, which is what we're going to chat about too.
Yeah, 15 months apart. So they're really close in age, but they're the loves of my life. And so I'm a full-time stay-at-home mom. My husband works 10-minute walk away, so it's nice he's able to help out in the morning, and he gets home before they're in bed at night. But we're doing the New York City thing until I think kindergarten comes into play, and then we'll figure out what's next. But yeah, a full-time mom. So that's kind of like where we come back and forth from Buffalo. So my parents and his parents are both still in Buffalo. So we're here a lot, which is where we are right now. We're in Alden. Oh.
Hey guys.
Hey, we're back.
Can you tell I brought my tripod? I'm really prepared at my parents today. It's fine. Fine.
So we're in Alden, which is great because it brings back a lot of like memories from when we were.
It's so nostalgic.
Yeah, when we were in middle school and high school.
She went to my parents' drawer. I don't know how I wasn't the fat kid in high school. Can we just preface that thank you, Dad, for good genes. We had a fat kid drawer. Not exaggerating. And Laura, because we have snacks, veggie sticks, not like we used to. She's like, Mr. and Mrs. Morgan, where are the Swiss cake rolls? Where are my Nutty Buddies? Because that was our fat kid drawer.
Yeah.
It's all we had. What were they, Little Debbie's? We had the entire stock in our drawer at all times.
Yeah, so I knew exactly where to find them, but unfortunately, they, I guess, moved on.
They've moved on. They've turned the page.
So yeah, me and my husband, we come home. Luckily, you know, our kids are young enough that we can still travel quite a bit. So we come back, and I stay with my parents, and we chill in Alden for a little bit at a time, and then we go back to New York. But we'll be here for another week, so that's kind of a nice perk of being a stay-at-home mom, where I'm able to kind of go back and forth and spend time with family. But yeah.
And I think too, where we're gonna kind of talk with this is PPD. It's not, oh, that's just for stay-at-home moms who get bored and you're depressed. It's mental health in general, I think, needs to be woken up a bit. And again, yes, it's getting better, but there's a lot to go nationally that needs to kind of be progressive. And we're going to kind of take you on a narrative of Laura's journey from being pregnant to those first weeks, to those dark, dark days of PPD, and then coming out the other end. And a big takeaway that we want to tell a lot of moms in our audience is that, yes, there's light at the end of the tunnel. And if you're someone who's in this right now, you will not live there forever. It's a period of time, and there's tools, there's people, and there's medication to help you get out of that and to just stop the judgment. And I think a big thing that we're going to talk about, kind of prior knowledge with PPD, is, for me, this is before children, before I really knew about it. I always thought, oh, PPD, that's for people that just don't like their babies and they have dark feelings of their babies. Because any documentary I watched, it was always like the extreme, that you're in a psych ward, and you know, that's such a one shade color of PPD. But that was kind of my preconceived notions of it.
Yeah.
Like, did you know anyone before who had it?
Not really. I mean, I remember like hearing the stories on the news about, I think that sometimes with postpartum depression,
like drowning your like
baby,
or
like
something.
it can, when you, the scary part and the part that like is managed if you do seek help, is it can turn into something called psychosis, which can create like really odd behavior. But that's such a like small percentage of cases that happens with. But I think those are the, I guess,
ones you hear more
you
about.
hear more about in the incidences that, like, I don't know, I think it has also created this stigma around it, because it's, in my experience, I didn't have any of like the negative feelings towards my babies, but I know that sometimes that's the way that people feel. But I just, not until I experienced it did I realize it was so like you could have such a different experience, or everyone's experiencing different things depending on, I guess, when you're going through it
and who you are as a person. And so when you, like your first pregnancy, so Vivian's your first.
Yeah.
And before, as you're pregnant with Vivian, we know this about each other, but talk a little bit about generalized anxiety, because this is something that you've always dealt with in life. And then anyone who's watching, does anyone here suffer with anxiety? Give a like or a heart if you're someone that suffers from anxiety, and that's something that you're getting treated with currently.
So in high school, college, I started to notice, I think even just being a young child, I noticed how anxious I was when my mom would leave or go to work or school. I had that like anxious personality where I was always fearful that something bad was going to happen. It was never treated, but it's definitely been a part of my personality. Not until probably college was I actually like, okay, like I'm getting way too anxious for tests or whatever. So I was put on like a low dose of Zoloft, I think, at the time. And that seemed to like help, and I'd kind of come on and off it. And when I would, do new things, like whether it was go to school, like go to college, or we traveled abroad together, actually. We studied in Sydney. It was like when I had a big change coming, good or bad, it definitely fueled that anxiety. But that was the extent of my experience with anxiety, is that I just felt like I got really anxious, and sometimes I took medication to help me with it, but it never was more than that. It just was kind of, it happened during stressful times in my life, whether it was good stress or bad stress.
So when you got pregnant with Vivian,
Yeah.
did your OB know prior that you suffered from anxiety?
She asked me, and we talked about it a little bit, if I had a history of anxiety or depression, kind of as the protocol for when you get pregnant, let's chat. And I told her, yeah, in college and a little bit after, and she just said, well, it's something that we'll continue to watch throughout your pregnancy. But it wasn't until about 3 months, I think I was due in 3 months with Vivian, and we found out she was really small, and she had something called IUGR, which is intrauterine growth restriction. Basically just means your baby isn't getting the nutrients for some reason. So she was under the first percentile, so they were looking at her size constantly.
So that off the cusp,
yeah.
You're like worried and nervous.
I was super anxious. I was on bed rest for 4 to 5 months at the end of that pregnancy, just to help her growth. So the pregnancy was definitely an anxious time. I remember kind of feeling like, wow, the baby isn't even here yet, and I'm feeling like so overwhelmed. And here I am just like on bed rest, but I can't take a nap. I couldn't relax. And that was kind of like the before. If we want to jump into like, so then I had Vivian, and she came out like on the borderline of being underweight. And we just kind of ran into like little problems here and there. Like she had reflux. We were sent back into the hospital a few times.
How did you know she had reflux? Because as anyone else, if your baby suffered from reflux, just like leave a little comment if they did, or if you were on bed rest, leave a little comment. Because I think those isolated things alone are enough to stress the parent out, because it's new and you don't know what to expect, and you just, in general, there's enough to worry about. And then when there's a health concern with you or baby, that adds a whole other layer to it.
Yeah, totally. So she came out and she was so little, and they were concerned about her. She wasn't gaining weight. She had to go back under the lights, and that was after we had already been home. So she'd been readmitted twice to the hospital. Meanwhile, I was kind of recovering from a really hard labor. So there was just, I felt like the first month after I had Viv, it was just really stressful. So to chalk anything up to being, other than the baby blues and just being a new mom, it was hard to kind of pinpoint like, oh, I'm definitely suffering from some sort of postpartum anxiety, depression. I just wasn't in a place to even wrap my head around that, because...
Do you think you were just so in a whirlwind of just going to doctor's appointments with her, and you're just tired, like, oh, this just must be what it's like when your baby's struggling?
And I think, like, my focus was 100% on her. So, yes, I'm kind of feeling these feelings, but I'm also thinking, she's my first priority, so I'm worried about her. I'm not thinking about my mental state at that point. Of course, I'm not sleeping. I'm trying to breastfeed, and it wasn't going well. I was putting out a couple ounces at a time, and she's not growing. So here I'm thinking, oh gosh, it's my problem. I'm not supplying her what she needs.
Right.
And when she was getting some milk, she was throwing up. And so it was just really stressful, because anything I could get in her stomach, she was spitting back out. So.
And she needs to thrive, right? So you have all these things that you're thinking about. Feeding that anxiety beast. Casey writes, oh my God, so much reflux with Bruce. It's been a struggle since he was born, and he's 4 now. So when you were in that, Casey, how did you manage that when Bruce was struggling? Did you have like a little baby blues moment because I think for a lot of new moms, I think baby blues can be common, especially because your body hormonally is coming down.
Oh yeah, I think like the first 10 to 14 days, it's like everybody experiences that. Like,
would you just cry? Is that what it would look
yeah,
like
just
for
like
you?
shifted hormones. I think just feeling like sad, and yeah, there definitely was a period that I felt like, okay, this is the normal baby blues period. But then for me, it just kept going. But again, it wasn't enough for me to be like clued in that something was off. And plus I had so much going on with Viv at the time. We were in and out of GI appointments. She was like screaming after every feeding for half an hour, barely eating. So I think my focus was solely on her at the time, that I wasn't clued into where I was. So as the months progressed, I was trying to breastfeed. I was breastfeeding, and she was just having a rough go. She was a colicky baby, and that's probably chalked up to her having stomach issues. But about 3 months in, I started getting a series of migraines that I couldn't get rid of. It was probably 5 or 6 days where I had them straight, and I have a little bit of a history with migraines, so my neurologist and doctors, they didn't want to take any chances with kind of getting stuck in this chronic series of migraines that I couldn't get out of, so they told me to stop breastfeeding abruptly and to get back on my migraine medication.
Do you think the migraines were attributed to not sleeping because of the stress, or was the anxiety probably bringing on the migraines?
I'm sure the anxiety was bringing on the migraines, and also the hormones. Like, you're going through such big hormone shifts during that time, months and months after you have a baby. So I think coupled all those things, the no sleep, the stress, and the hormones probably put me into a whirlwind of headaches. But it was that week when I chose to stop breastfeeding abruptly, and we kind of weaned off in a matter of like 3 days, where I had the second, I guess, dip in hormones, that I went from being like this anxious mom, which I thought was like a normal thing, to being like not functional.
So before we get into that week, Amanda says, why did we have this child? She loved her baby, of course, but would talk about how devastating it was. And Heather writes, she was hospitalized in bed rest for a week before her son was born, and then he was in the NICU for 6 weeks. She can totally relate with not thinking about yourself at all. Casey wrote, so many similarities. And then we both got pregnant again. So many hormones.
Yeah.
And I think that big takeaway is, when you're dealing mentally with this load of everything, but you have this new baby, and then if your new baby is compiled on to having health concerns, and you're going to appointments, and you're thinking, I just had the baby, that's stressful enough, and now there's these whole new slew of things that I don't know how to fix. And anyone who's dealt with anxiety, I think there's a level of perfectionism and wanting to be in control, and that's what fuels the anxiety part, right? And so when you're not in control of being able to fix those things, and you're trying to just figure it out and make it work, it creates this perfect storm of postpartum.
Yeah. So
you drop this hormone shift all of a sudden, and what happens to you?
So I dropped breastfeeding, and I had a kind of a surge of hormones that dropped, and from after, at the time I didn't really understand what was going on, but after talking to my therapist and we kind of went through it, she explained to me what actually happened. That dip in hormones kind of, it's like you're creating the birth experience all over again, like in terms of hormones, where you can actually like dip back into those like baby blues, but they're so intense that it's like you're actually in postpartum, but you don't, I think for me, it was so clouded for the first 3 months because I was dealing with so much that I chalked it up to being anxious. My mom would notice things here and there, like, you're really withdrawn, like, you don't want to hang out with your friends. But I think it was that intense drop in hormones that, like, they explain can really push women back into that, like, postpartum feeling. And for me, it was very extreme, where I was not really functioning. I remember looking at Viv on a changing table and not knowing how to change her. Like, I just couldn't function. And that's my experience was that I was at such a high level of anxiety that I basically was embedded. And it's probably depression too. Those things are intertwined very loosely, I think, in this period of time. But for me, it felt like a very anxious time. So I say anxiety a lot. But
Were you home alone?
No. So at this point, it was right after Thanksgiving, and I was actually... It's hard to remember the exact details because my mom came back and forth to New York with us a couple times to help, get us situated during this time. But when this happened, I was actually in Buffalo. We were driving home. It was Thanksgiving when I gave up breastfeeding, and then it was the week after that was like my trigger week that everything went to shit.
That makes sense because I remember coming to visit you.
Yeah. And
I remember being, I could get like emotional. That wasn't a cry. That was a veggie stick on my uvula.
I was like, wow, that's timely.
I know, but I totally could cry thinking of this. I remember going to visit Laura, and again, symptoms look different for different people. And I was at your parents' house because you were up visiting, and I remember Vivian waking up from a nap and she started fussing, and it literally, hearing her cry, you literally look like you're in physical pain. Like I could just see this. Yeah. Dread is like the best word I can think of that like came over you, like this shroud of dread. Yeah. And I remember thinking, my poor friend, like what's going on, what's happening.
Yeah,
and I didn't know what was going on.
I was pretty private during that experience. I think
but I think that's probably typical.
Yeah, I mean, I was trying to process it myself. So I think at the time, one of the symptoms of being in postpartum depression is how withdrawn you become. So not only was I withdrawn, but I was just trying to understand what was going on with me, and I was also trying to take care of my baby, which I was not able to do.
Yeah.
So my mom, we kind of created a action plan, and we started...
So did she sit you down and make you do this? Did she like almost do a timeout, or did you come to her?
I remember there being like specific moments, like the changing table moment, and like being in my mom's kitchen and just saying like, there's a problem here. Like
you talked about driving too.
Yeah, I was driving home from Donnie's parents' house. They live in Niagara Falls, and my parents live out in Alden. And it was like a 45-minute drive, and I just remember it was raining, and the anxiety was so heavy that I was so nervous just being on the 290. I had to pull over in the rain because I felt like I was going to have a car accident. I was just so anxious. So there's just like little moments all coupled together that
these are typical moments that I normally can exist and live in, and I can't function even at these basic levels right now.
It's so, there's only one way to describe it, is I just couldn't function. In those 4 weeks, we came up with a plan. My mom came back with us to New York. She helped. I remember driving back to New York and that 8-hour drive back, and Viv was in the back seat with my mom. Her and Donnie would do everything. Like they would change her diaper, they would feed her, and I just sat in the front seat and literally just like stared out the window. Like I was, first 4 to 6 weeks was really detached from Viv and Donnie and my mom, and I think my mom really understood what was happening, and she kind of helped Donnie understand, but I was not in a place of explaining to anybody what was happening.
Right.
But when I did get back to New York, I found a reproductive psychologist and who deals with women in postpartum.
Did you have to research that on your own, or did you call your OB?
So my OB recommended her.
Okay. So when you got back, did you call your OB and say, look, I think I have postpartum?
Yeah.
Okay.
So she's the one that advised me to stop breastfeeding once I was in the middle of this migraine spree. And after that dip in hormones, I called her probably like 5 days later and said, I'm in a really bad way. And she gave me the name and the number.
Okay.
It's who I contacted her, and I got in. Luckily, New York is a wonderful place to live in the sense that like there's so many resources. So there's like actual clinics for people who have postpartum, and which I didn't utilize those specifically, but after going through it, I now know how many resources are available. and I just wish that everybody had the resources that I had at my fingertips, but I did just use a therapist in those 6 weeks.
So what was your first like appointment like?
So,
because I feel like I would go in and just sit and cry and be like, just tell me what to do. Because
Yeah.
how do you even put into words what you just experienced?
right, she definitely led the meeting.
Yeah.
But it was really intense, and reflecting back on it after years and still seeing her in different moments, she reminds me of how bad it was, and how far I've come, especially after the first 6 to 8 weeks. That was kind of my treatment period. I honestly, I don't really remember, other than just telling her, answering her questions, and being very honest with how I was feeling. I remember having I'd wake up with this feeling of like such dread, and I would like just want the evening to be there so I could go to bed again. And then it was just a cycle of like wanting,
just, can I get through this day?
can I get through this day? But then when the morning came again, it was like not wanting to go to bed because I didn't want the morning to come again.
Yeah.
So,
Can anyone else relate to that? I mean, that's raw to open up about, but I think this is a place that a lot of moms have felt. And even if maybe you never got a professional diagnosis of postpartum, maybe you're listening and thinking, holy crap, like I had that. That can sometimes feel like in the first newborn stages, but when that's not going away, yeah, look at all these people, like that's a feeling, and when that's not going away, I think it's a really humbling thing to look at yourself and say, I can't do this on my own. Like, this isn't fixed. This isn't getting fixed. And thankfully you had your mom who's like that person.
yeah.
Like, her mom's like amazing, like umbrella statement all around. And I think even deeper though, she's really intuitive. Like, all moms kind of like see and like get you, but to have someone to just see and to call you out and to help pull you, because in that moment, I know you can say, I know this isn't normal,
Right.
and I know I don't feel like me,
Yeah.
but is this just motherhood? And I think that's a scary place for a lot of new moms is, am I just in new mom mode, that I'm
Totally.
overwhelmed by this?
And I think like the first 3 months, I probably was in full-blown postpartum depression, but at the time, again, I thought I was chalking it up to being a new mom. I think throughout my life, like, change, whether it was good or bad, brought on anxiety. So this was no different, except this was such a major change. And I think that, coupled with hormones, is such like a recipe for postpartum. If you're susceptible to generalized anxiety and change is really difficult for you, and then on top of it you have these surges and dips of hormones. For me, it was like once I stopped breastfeeding and I had that extreme dip in hormones, it was like undeniable. I went from being generalized anxiety to like not classifying it as postpartum, which it probably was, to being just not functional.
Well, look at what Missy writes. So here's a woman who didn't have PPD until she breastfed. And Missy, if you watched one of my earlier episodes, she was like the breastfeeding guru and has breastfed all 3 girls and has breastfed longer and has like been pregnant or breastfeeding like throughout like the past couple years. And she wrote that she got PPD bad after she finished breastfeeding each time. And her doctor said the hormones from breastfeeding masks PPD sometimes, and it can come out after you stop.
Because that like produces the oxytocin, which is when you're breastfeeding, you release this like feel-good hormone.
Endorphins, yeah. This is what I'm so worried about, because with Autumn, I breastfed while pregnant with Morgan. That's how long so I don't know what being postpartum without breastfeeding looks like yet. And I'm still breastfeeding Morgan. And I worry, I'm so scared about that, especially now seeing what Missy wrote, that's a real thing. So interesting, Missy, since you got it after each time, just out of curiosity, is that something that your doctor recognized and then put you on a treatment plan going forward? Because I think that's a big thing if you've been someone who's been breastfeeding a long time, because it's a hormone imbalance sometimes, and It's a big hormonal shift. That is there a way to put it on a treatment plan if you stop breastfeeding suddenly? Because that was a big thing with Vivian.
Yeah.
That put you in those that really, really hard time. Over a year each time, yeah.
Interesting. Missy, I'm just curious, how long did you wean off breastfeeding, or was it something that you stopped abruptly? We prep for very slow with weaning. Interesting. Oh, so she did do a low
I might talk to my OB so Missy, I've been thinking about, because I want kind of my life back. I breastfed Morgan for a year, and I have one boob that's significantly larger, don't look, than the other, and I kind of want to stop, and I need to talk about like the weaning process, but this scares the bejesus out of me. Like, it's terrifies me.
Well, I remember I felt like when you stopped, did you ever stop? Well, when you stopped,
I stopped breastfeeding, and I was currently pregnant.
Yeah.
Because I stopped breastfeeding Autumn a month before she turned 2. That's how long, and I was already 4 months pregnant.
Yeah. I think, everybody's bodies do different things, but it's, from what the therapist told me, it's not uncommon after you stop breastfeeding, particularly in my case, because it was so abrupt.
Because it was just cold turkey.
Cold turkey. I stopped in 3 days. I put cabbage on my boobs and, stopped.
That's what you do?
It just helps, dry you up a little bit.
Like, what do you do? Like, a leaf of cabbage? I need to know this.
Green cabbage leaves.
Like, just a green
cabbage,
like
those
an insert?
days remind me of just, being so engorged and having, raw cabbage.
Smelling like raw.
Yes.
Why does it do that?
I don't know. It's just, I don't know. I haven't done.
So random.
Yeah.
I've never heard of
Really?
this. Yes. And I saw the pediatrician, so maybe they wouldn't.
Yeah,
talk.
they probably wouldn't tell you to put cabbage leaves.
I've never heard of these things. Okay, let's see what Missy wrote. Sasha stopped herself, which made me sad, and she was ready. I was not, but I kept pumping to slow the process so the hormone surge wouldn't happen. Smart Missy. So you were kind of proactive about it. So I guess that's key, is to do it slowly, and then also maybe just clue in your OB. So maybe that's something I should do.
Yeah, and I mean, this was just, I'm speaking on my experience. I don't know if, this is across the board. It's something that I remember at the time my therapist saying that they're seeing so often in clinical settings, is that women who stop breastfeeding abruptly are prone to this second surge of hormones that, like you said, the oxytocin is no longer being pumped. So it's just kind of masking probably what's already existing. But to kind of fast forward,
so you're getting you all of a sudden are seeing your postpartum therapist,
yeah,
and she's really helping you.
So
what kind of, because I'm sure she starts talking about a plan, what we can do to get out of this.
So something I haven't mentioned yet is that initially it was so dramatic that I sought her out before I'd even gotten to New York. So I was in Buffalo and I called her, and we'd spoken a couple times over the phone, and I was on medication before I even got back to New York. So that was the first step. I was on a higher dose of an antidepressant, and that took about a week or so to kick in. I started to kind of notice the changes within a week.
What felt different?
Just less anxious, I guess.
Okay.
Yeah, that's probably the only thing that I can really say at the time that felt so different. Because the anxiety was so debilitating.
Yeah.
That's what I noticed.
You felt more confident in things you were doing.
Yeah, less dread, I guess.
Okay.
But it certainly wasn't where it needed to be. So I saw her maybe 2 times a week. I had my mom there for a month, and then I had full-time help for 3 to 4 weeks after my mom left. We just hired somebody to help, and she basically took care of Viv while I went to and from appointments and dealt with what I needed to deal with. I think we just kind of attacked the situation with as best we could, and at the time that was our solution, and it helped me heal pretty quickly.
And I think what a blessing too. So I think a big thing when you're dealing with this is you obviously have whomever you're married to as part of it, right? So how was Donnie in dealing with, what was his preconceived notions of mental illness? Or was it Laura, are you sure you're not just feeling sad, or this is normal? Because I know not to this is not to throw Lee under the bus. Lee's my person, but I know he gets cloudy about mental illness sometimes, and we get in talks about it often, and that's a whole side to it of who your spouse is and like what's that support system look like.
So Donnie definitely hadn't experienced any sort of mental illness before, like anxiety, depression, and there had been some like things that happened in my life previously that he had seen me go through, and I explained to him, like, I'm susceptible to, so we had kind of gone through those conversations in the past, but he, I think, during that week, really saw that huge shift where I went from an anxious mom to, like, just not functioning.
Yeah.
And I think for the first time, mental illness became real to him, and he took it very seriously, and he was so supportive, and luckily him and my mom have a really great relationship, so
That's amazing.
During that, she was really like the person connecting all the dots, and she kept him informed. I meanwhile when I was in bed a lot. I for that month was not taking care of Viv, and I didn't have those feelings of like I didn't want to harm my baby, and there's no shame in the women that do feel those things, but for me it looked
different for you. For
me it was just this definite feeling of like withdrawal, and also I couldn't function. Just anxiety beyond a level of functioning. And this is the first time probably a lot of people are hearing me say most of this. I think beyond my mom and Donnie and my sisters, there's not a lot of people that know to the extent, even at the time, of what was happening.
Well, I think sometimes what happens, I don't think, this is almost like a known, right? So, and again, this is kind of the world of social media that we live in. You see the highlight reel of people's lives and the good things. And what can happen, though, is that if you're in a moment when you have baby blues, postpartum, or you're just struggling as a new mom, or maybe, you had this vision of, oh, I'm going to look perfect after I have my baby, and it's going to be so easy, and I'm going to be going to the park a week after, and instead you're taking baths with a baby wipe with your tits, pits, and naughty bits, and that was a successful day for you. And I think it's really easy to think, well, something must be wrong with me, and I must not be a good mom. And then you have these layers of mom guilt that nobody wants to be vulnerable and to, open themselves up to judgment. And I think what is great about this, and what hopefully this platform is, hey there, it's just knowing that momhood and motherhood is not a one-size-fits-all, and it's having awareness and just knowledge. Knowledge is power, and the more people you know that have gone through something, and it's not the definition of commiserating with somebody, like, oh, they're struggling too, or they had it way worse, I must not be doing bad. No, it's having those aha moments, and it's about connecting, right, to somebody else who they've felt that too. I'm not a bad mom. I'm not a bad person, because this is something that is a normal. It's a normal cause. It's a hormonal issue. It's not based genetically on something that's like wrong with you, or that your heart isn't big enough that you're loving on your babies. This is something we're all susceptible to. And the more we can talk about action plans and knowing that, and because Laura's going to talk about her second pregnancy and how to be proactive with that, it's empowering. And this is what this is about. It's empowering each other, not judging each other, but empowering each other, so that this doesn't feel so icky and like, oh, PPD, oh my gosh, we're going to talk about it. It's just going to be more of like a normal thing. Like, oh, like, yeah, I had PPD too. This is the steps I took to help me. Oh, you did that? That it just becomes more normalized. And to stop feeling like we all need to lead these perfect, quote unquote, lives, because that's not the norm. And I think anyone who has anxiety, social media can almost be like a beast. Yeah. And I think this is something that Laura's going to talk about. Part of her proactive plan is knowing that and taking steps and taking a break from it, right? Yeah. And knowing that is it benefiting you? Is it adding value to your life? And if not, taking a break from it.
Totally.
So you get this help, you're seeing your therapist, and after you kind of come out of this darkness and your medication starts kicking in.
So it's about 6 to 8 weeks of therapy, like really intense talk therapy, and the medication's probably at this point really kicked in. I start seeing kind of like changes and like feeling like I can take a breath and I can rest when the baby rests. And I mean, before that, like I was anxiously washing a million bottles while she was sleeping. Like there was never a moment that I could relax during the day prior to that. So just recognizing that like I'm feeling okay enough to take a breath and feeling like I want to see people. I had a lot of friends reach out after I had Viv, and the last thing I felt like doing at the time was seeing somebody. I just derailed all of those like meetings because I just didn't. That was a big sign to my mom.
You were probably numb, weren't you? Did you feel numb at all, or was that it different?
It just was like this feeling of like didn't want to socialize at all.
Okay.
And on top of it, Viv she was always like, after she ate, I knew that it would be 30 minutes of colic crying. So I was anxious that there'd be people around. We'd be trying to talk and she'd be upset. So I think once those feelings started to dissipate and I wanted to start reaching out and branching out and meeting new moms, which I created a great network in New York of first-time moms who are some of my best friends now. That
give a like if you're watching.
That to me was like a big, and they'll know that first meeting I was a wreck, and I connected with them on such a level, and I think that's what, you know, like a reason that we're still so close is that they were with me through it all. But I wasn't at a point where I could make those connections until I was in treatment and even a couple weeks into treatment. So I think building a connection, reaching out to people, for me, medication and seeing a therapist, it wasn't like this was a long-term plan. I saw somebody for 8 weeks, a couple times a week, and then I downed my medication after 2 months, and I kind of was on a low dose, and then, oops, I got pregnant again.
So when that happened, and I remember that, because Vivian was 8 months old.
Yeah.
Has anyone else ever had like a surprise? Here comes another child. And I don't want to put words in your mouth, but it's almost like you finally got your feet underneath you, right? And it's, here we go again. Yeah. So like, what was going on in your mind?
Like, I mean, we were shocked, completely shocked. But
there's some good swimmers.
Jeez. But after the initial shock let up, I think just like how am I going to like prepare myself better than I did with Viv for that same situation. If I can't control this, if this is hormones and I'm just at the mercy of, you know, whatever's going to happen, how can I? So what I did was I reached out to that same therapist who I'd stopped seeing, told her I was pregnant again, and we started some kind of like proactive sessions. And then with my OB, we talked about a plan, once I delivered Teddy, what I would do. And it was not to breastfeed, and that's just the choice that I made, and to get on medication right away. And you know, I struggled big time with not breastfeeding, but I knew in my heart that really contributed to that huge dip for me, and it was the right call.
And I think that's an empowering thing for a lot of moms to know, because I think there's a lot of stigma if you're on the crunchy end of being, I'm an exclusively breastfed, not because I'm crunchy granola, but because it's convenient, right? And we all fall in different realms of like why we bottle feed, why we breastfeed. And I know there's this fed is best movement with, yes, that's true. But it also comes with, as a parent, it's having self-awareness and what's going to work for you and what's going to be best for you. And you just do whatever is best for you. Yeah. And I think that was a huge moment for you, and brave isn't the right word, but like just having just good self-awareness and being really in tune, like a good mom moment, I'll call it. It was a really good mom moment to know I'll be my best version of me if this is the course of action I take.
I think I was like in my back of my mind just feeling like I'm giving it the best shot by doing this. Yeah. And that's just what my gut told me to do. But it wasn't without, and I don't know how it would have went with Teddy. He was a completely different baby than Viv. He didn't have reflux. He didn't have a milk allergy. So maybe breastfeeding would have went beautifully. I don't know. But that's just how I decided to approach the situation, because it was so awful the first time around, that I didn't want to, now on top of it, have a toddler, or sort of, at the time, Viv was 15 months, I have another baby to take care of on top of this newborn that I'm bringing home. I can't afford to be offline for 6 weeks.
No.
So I had to, that was the decision I made. And I knew all along, deep down, that it was the right decision. I never thought like, oh, maybe I'm not doing the right thing. But I still felt like those moments of having to explain myself to people, or feeling like, I don't know, just, I think that, like you said, like the breast is best, fed is best conversation kind of popped up in my head.
Getting better, but still, I think a lot of moms who bottle feed, everyone has like a different reason for that. And it pains me that a mom feels like she has to explain why she's making a choice, right? But I think, again, we're slowly getting better at things, but we have, again, a long ways to go. Let's see what, people are just loving on you, Laura. Because this is like a huge topic. So, a big thing, anyone who's watching this too, if you know somebody suffering from PPD, if they're not watching, please share this, because hopefully there'll be an aha moment. And if you could, share with a new mom who suffers from anxiety, like if you could talk to you, because remember before we went on this, I said, pretend you're talking to you, like you before all of this happened. Like, what are some big aha moments through this whole process that you wish you would have known?
I guess with knowing about myself prior to getting pregnant, it was I had generalized anxiety. So I think if I had known a bit more about postpartum going into Viv's pregnancy, like that you're more susceptible if you have mental illness, that you're more susceptible to having postpartum. So, and I think like having if you just kind of create like maybe it's like a rough plan of what to do if things derail after the baby, because I feel like once the baby comes, your focus is going to be on them, whether your mind is somewhere else or not. I think I probably could have gotten help a lot sooner, but I didn't really have a plan in place, and I also I wasn't thinking about the warning signs. I didn't put any thought into that this could happen.
Right.
My mom, who's just more intuitive, and I think she's more of a mama bear, she was just on the lookout, and she saw the signs before I did. And then I absolutely felt a huge change in that week, but that was really a drastic thing that I don't know that everybody with postpartum necessarily will go through this drastic moment like I did, where I go from functioning to not functioning. So I don't want to like say there's this moment that you're gonna know, because I think for a long time I was in it and I just didn't realize. So I think if just being generally aware of how you're feeling, if those 2 weeks of baby blues after the baby come and go and you're still feeling, down or like anxious, start talking to somebody, and maybe before you even get to the point of having the baby, you have a plan in place.
And some things that you do now that, you have a mom of 2 toddlers, that's huge. And it's not that all of a sudden, like, you're out of your PPD, your anxiety is gone. Like, this is something that you're always going to be managing. So
I literally can't with the drops.
I know. You know what, Amanda Jean?
Got 2 blondes working the
I forgot the tripod. We got some makeshift ghetto. I found a Canon video camera, which who has? This is literally what you would record a VHS tape on. I found this box in my parents' basement that it's all It's all fine. You're hearing the things that are needing to be heard. So, last thing. So, anyway, your anxiety is it's not like this thing that's just poof, like a fairy godmother comes and it's gone. Like, these are things that you're learning to deal with.
To cope
so,
with, yeah.
what are some tools, quote unquote? Like, what's in your toolbox? That sounds so teachery. What are things that you do to help your week, to help you get through it?
Yeah. So part of my like plan right now is I meditate. I know that.
Like, what do you mean by meditate?
Well, the way that I do it is, I know that Lindsay mentioned this in her video, but I use the app Headspace, and it's just guided meditation, and I like to meditate.
How many minutes are you on?
Like 5 to 10.
Yeah,
Yeah.
I've started it, and it's wonderful.
Yeah. I take breaks from social media and to just be offline. I found that really helps. I exercise like 5 to 6 times a week in the morning. A big thing for me has been getting up really early.
Talk about that book real quick, because I know you said how much you loved it.
The Miracle Morning?
Yes, yeah.
So just like, it's this book called The Miracle Morning that Casey actually told me about. And
hey, Casey, shout out.
It kind of like leads you through owning your mornings and how that starts your day off. And so for me, it's been like having 2 babies. I don't have too much time for myself, so having the morning to work out, to like make my breakfast, to like write down my intentions for the day and what I want to accomplish has been life-changing. So that's like my current like I guess, what's the word? It's the way that I'm like managing right now. I still have anxiety, so I do these things to manage my current anxiety. But at the moment, it was talk therapy, medication, exercise, and meditation. Yeah,
all of these things of feeding yourself, right, and loving on yourself, and has helped you a ton.
Totally, and eating like whole foods and cutting out refined sugar, that has helped tremendously with my energy levels. So those things have created a really happy mom.
Yeah.
Just a mom that's able to take care of 2 little toddlers. When Teddy, I don't know that we touched upon this yet, but after I had Teddy, I decided not to breastfeed, and I went on medication literally the day after I had him. And luckily, it was a really easy newborn, and I had a really great experience that time around, and I don't know what to chalk it up to. I think with anxiety, a lot is the like fear of change and fear of the unknown, and already being a second-time mom, it's like I knew what to expect with a lot of the newborn stuff. So I think that change aspect was a little different the second time around. So maybe like that had something to do with it. And also I didn't breastfeed, so I didn't have
You wonder if there's so many different
I know.
factors.
I just feel like it might have been a combination of all of my decisions led me to kind of the outcome, which was a good outcome this time around. But I feel like being proactive really helped me in this case, and I'm glad that, I don't know, I just think that's why I'm doing this too, is if you're not yet pregnant, or you are pregnant, or you did have one bad experience, and it's helpful to be proactive, even if you might think there's a chance. That would be my advice.
And it can be really scary to say these things out loud to somebody. And, you know, Laura's on here for a reason. If maybe you're just still talking to your OB, but you need another soundboard, and maybe you're not comfortable, you're not in a place because, you know, Laura was in a place she wasn't ready to talk to her friends. I mean, this is the first time she's publicly even like talking about it, right? Mm-hmm. So if you're in this right now, message Laura, because it's one thing to talk to somebody about it and have them hear you and listen, but it's another thing to have somebody understand you. And Laura's a person that will be able to hear and understand where you're coming from. And, you know, sometimes that makes all the difference when you're having therapy, to have someone that can be pouring into you and reminding you that this isn't a forever thing. you are a good mom and you are a good person and you will get better. It sometimes really helps to have that.
Yeah, totally. I think without all the like support pieces in my the support people in my arsenal, I don't know, like I remember there were moments that I just felt like I couldn't go on in those 6 weeks. And it wasn't like for me it wasn't like there was something that was going to happen, but that was the amount of dread that I was feeling. So to have as much support as possible and to know that there's people like out there that are willing to help and to listen. I don't know, I just want to be another soundboard for somebody else who could be experiencing this and don't think they have somebody to talk to.
So after the video, we'll share too some of the great things Laura's currently doing, and then also her profile page, that if you want a message and need somebody or know somebody that could benefit, please share this, because the more people know that it's a normalized thing and it's something that isn't a forever thing and it's not a life sentence, but it's just a period in time that needs to be managed, could be really, really beneficial. And thank you so much. You really rocked the audience tonight, Laura. So you must have a lot of mamas loving on you.
Yeah. Thanks everybody for watching, and I'm always here for you. You know where to find me if you need somebody to talk to. And I hope this is just the first step in this little community to end the stigma around postpartum, and hopefully it can be a more open discussion from here on out.
We love you guys.
Bye.
Bye.